on stage Mr. Anil Srivastava, PR Consultant and Mission Director, Mission for Transformation, Mobility and Battery Storage, National Institute for Transforming India, NITI Aayog. Mr. Anil Srivastava has over 3 decades of working experience with government in India, has taken over as advisor for infrastructural connectivity and Director General of Development, Motoring and Evolution Office at NITI Aayog. Third, I'd like to call on stage Mr. Jitendra Sharma, Founder and Managing Director, Okinawa Scooters. He has over 2 decades of experience in the two-wheeler industry and in the past has worked with Honda, Motorcycles and Scooters India Private Limited. He studied mechanical engineering at Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University, Aurangabad, and did his MBA from Pondicherry University. And to conduct this panel, I'd like to call on stage Mr. Vinny Mehta, Director General, ACMA. He's actively been involved in promotion, growth, and development of the auto component industry in India. He's an alumni of IIT Bhubaneswar, University of Delhi, and the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. Mr. Mehta headed the Manufacturers Association for Information Technology before joining ACMA. Mr. Vinny, over to you.
A very good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here with my very eminent panelists on the dais here. And of course, the subject is equally interesting to talk about the road ahead for electric mobility. I would say that India is just about begun to walk on the road for electric mobility. Maybe I'll begin with some perspective on where we are globally, come down to India, and then maybe I'll invite each of our panelists to give a little perspective of what they're into, share their perspective, talk about their opportunities, challenges, and then maybe I'll pick up some threads and also involve the audience. So I was just going through this very recent Bloomberg report on electric mobility. And of course, they focused more on the pass cars, the electric pass cars. And it's about just about 2 odd million cars that are electric today. Various variants, it's both pure battery cars as well as PHEVs and other variants. This is really out of an installed, we sold about 85 million total cars in 2018, of which 2 million were electric. And in 2025, we expect this really to go 5x. The electric cars will become 10 million, whereas the number of cars sold annually in that year, that is 2025, will be about 88 million. 2030, looking at 28 million electric cars of 95 million overall pass cars. And 2040, 56 million of 100 million installed base. So literally what is to be noted is that the pace of adoption of electric cars globally will be really very, very steep. And of course, 2040 is somewhere you'll have more than 50% of the overall cars, that is 56 million, which is 56% of the overall. And by that time, it is expected the installed base for e-buses will be something like 400,000. And interestingly, by 2040, the installed base, or as we call vehicle park in our parlance, for EVs, that is passenger EVs, passenger cars, electric, will be 500 million, and for commercial vehicle, 40 million. And it is in 2036, 2036 is sort of like a point of inflection where the sales of EVs will overtake the sales of the IC engine vehicles, and from a perspective of the car industry. And coming to the commercial vehicle industry, by 2040, 56% of LCVs and 31% of MCVs will be electric. This is for China, US, and the European Union. And by 2040, the targets for electric for Japan is something like 63% of the annual sales of total cars. For South Korea, 52%. For Australia, 61%. And interestingly, China will be 26%, although China is like 50% of the EV market today. And 2025, they're expected to be 48%, and 2030 by 34%. So I sort of wanted to, it may sound very number intensive, but the moot point is that the adoption of electric cars globally and electric vehicles in general, not just cars, is going to be very, very rapid. The global reports typically don't talk about two-wheelers because two-wheelers dominate China, India, Indonesia, this part of the world. Near home, the government sort of announced the FAME 2 policy. FAME stands for Faster Adoption of Manufacturing of Electric Vehicles. What was very noteworthy for this scheme is that the entire scheme is completely technology agnostic. It talks about technologies. It does not talk about specifically a battery technology or a plug-in hybrid or start-stop or any other. It's technology agnostic. Of course, the FAME 2 is based on certain parameters of performance based on which the government will give subsidy. The quantum of subsidy is 10,000 crores. It's again based on the battery capacity. Rupees 10,000 per kilowatt hour is what the government will extend to the vehicle manufacturer. And I just spoke to the Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Heavy Industry last evening. What is very interesting is that the scheme came about in the month of March, and by the time they came up with notifications and stuff like that, it became May. So from May till November end, they've been able to sell something like 6,000 vehicles, electric vehicles. What is very important to note is that there is a huge focus on localization in this. I heard in the last session somebody say, the panelists said that the component industry is something one must watch for. And I think herein comes some of the directions from the government, because the FAME 2 incentives can only be had if you have 50% localization when it comes to two-wheelers and passenger cars, 50% localization and 50% localization for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, 40% localization when it comes to buses and taxis. So of the close to 6,000 electric vehicles that were sold under FAME 2 this year, two-wheelers, of course, it's a low-hanging fruit, and about 4,500 were two-wheelers, about 1,100 were three-wheelers, and passenger vehicles were about 376. And what is very interesting is that the government has already sanctioned close to 5,600 e-buses for procurement. They are under various stages of tender. So suddenly, there's a big traction that's coming on when it comes to electric vehicles. Of course, what is driving here is the reduction in cost of batteries one needs to make note of. In 2010, the cost of battery was something like rupees 1200 per US dollar 1200 per kilowatt hour, and in 2018, it's dropped to $176 per kilowatt hour. 2025, it is expected to be $87 per kilowatt hour, and 2030, it's expected to be $62 per kilowatt hour. So that's something that's driving the adoption of electric mobility, and I think the Niti Aayog, the Department of Heavy Industry, have done a humongous work in terms of rolling out the policies. Mr. Srivastav is currently engaged in probably scripting a policy for battery manufacturing, because that's one huge part of the ecosystem that is missing in this country for battery manufacturing, though we have some level of assembly of packages, battery packages, but battery manufacturing, cell manufacturing, and component manufacturing, that is essentially the electrolyte, the anode, the cathode, that ecosystem is completely missing in this country at this juncture. So now before I talk about the other things and get into a monologue, I thought let me bring in my next speaker, and I would like to invite Mr. Srivastav, because the other two panelists sitting here are OEMs. One is a two-wheeler manufacturer, he's a startup two-wheeler manufacturer, and the other one is an established multi-product manufacturer, diversified into electric mobility. But it is the government that is setting the boundary conditions for manufacturing of electric mobility, adoption of electric mobility, and that can make or mar the story. So Mr. Srivastav, may I bring you in, and can you sort of give a perspective of how the government is enabling the electric mobility market and the ecosystem in the country, because there are many connotations when it comes to the ecosystem. It is the policy, it is the consumer awareness, it is the infrastructure, when infrastructure is battery manufacturing, component manufacturing, the charging infrastructure. And then from a consumer perspective, there are a whole lot of factors, right from total cost of ownership to range anxiety, to issues such as, eventually what will be the residual cost when I make a sale of an electric vehicle after it's used for 5 years, a resale value. So there are many dimensions to the product, but again, setting the boundary conditions is very important for everybody to work on. So Mr. Srivastav, yeah.
Thank you, Vinny, and a very good evening to all of you. When we talk about electric vehicles or EVs, probably we cannot separate it out from the entire mobility paradigm. The paradigm is shifting. Mobility, movement of people, movement of goods, movement of freight is coming at the center stage of the economic activity, and which is rightly so. The government also should be wishing that it is there. And for the first time, if you also think about it, the passenger or the traveler is thinking about the time it takes to travel, the convenience, and the way he reaches from point A to B. Now, we cannot ignore, we cannot dissociate the development toward the electric vehicles when we talk about from this mobility perspective. Mobility perspective is changing, yes, of course. The change is from owning the vehicle. Now the trend is to own the ride. Traveling individually on an asset, from there moving over to the shared mobility. So these are the developments which are taking place. and rightly so, to our understanding. We organized a global summit on the mobility last year, inaugurated by the Prime Minister, and he spoke about as to what is the government's perspective or the recommendations should be. And he illustrated those 7 C's: connected, common, cutting edge, convenient, likewise. And they all explain as to how the mobility or the transformative mobility should be looked at. In Niti Aayog, we have a mission which is on the transformative mobility and battery storage. Now, things are interrelated. That is why the mission has to take care of both the things, not only the transformative mobility, but also with the battery storage, because the battery storage is needed for the mobility purpose as well as for the shift which is going to take place from the conventional sources of energy to the new and renewable energy. So these are all interrelated things. We are coordinating the activities of different ministries, departments, whether it is the Department of Science and Technology, Department of Heavy Industries, Ministry of Road Transport, Ministry of Power, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and Bureau of Indian Standards, along with the state governments. Now, the state governments are also extremely proactive for accepting the shift which is taking place in the mobility and also the adoption of electric vehicles. 12 states, the progressive states and the bigger states have already come out with their electric vehicle policies, and rest are in the process of discussing and moving forward. So friends, and along with that, the intention of the government is also absolutely clear. The finance minister mentioned about it in her budget speech itself. The income tax benefit which has been announced along with the budget. There were other announcements in the budget for the duty structures. Some of them are yet to be notified. And various ministries and the departments of the government have come out with 20-odd major policy announcements. Now, friends, if you look at it, some of the policy announcements may not be sounding all that simple, but if the government announces that setting up a charging station is going to be without any permission or permit, that's a landmark decision. Capping the tariff rate for a power charging station is also a landmark decision, that the DISCOMs will not be charging more than the purchase price plus 15%. Similarly, some of the major announcements by the Ministry of Road Transport that the electric vehicles will not be charged, the commercial electric vehicles will not be having to pay any permit fee. They will be free of cost, the permit would be there for the commercial activities. The electric vehicles will not be having charged the road tax even. So these are extremely proactive and very excellent steps which have been shown by the intention of the governments as to they intend to be taking over this change which is going to take place. Now, what is government's wish list? What do we think about it? Simple thing, we would like to reduce our import bills of petroleum products, which is to the tune of $180 billion kind of import bills. We would also like to reduce the pollution and the environmental considerations. The top 15 most polluted cities happen to be in India, in the entire northern belt. So these are probably the major considerations, and plus along with that, another major consideration which should be there is regarding the growth of automobile sector which is happening in India. Some of the figures were given by Vinny here regarding the projected growth of automobile sector and how much is going to be. Friends, The size and the scale of growth and the industry, automobile industry, or the mobility in totality which is offered in the country is itself provides tremendous opportunity to build upon it for taking up a leadership position globally. Now I have two OEM leaders here with me, one in the two-wheeler segment, another in the four-wheeler electric vehicle segment, and they would also be speaking it out. But I must say that this is the opportunity when you start making for the country and build it up from there to export, to take it to the world. It should be made in India and made for the world. That should be the call at this point. Vinny has also talked about localization. Ideally speaking, friends, then again, I mean, not as a spokesperson of the government or as a Niti Aayog spokesperson, but my personal call would be that why localization? The whole thing should be designed, developed, and manufactured in the country. Localization, the question of localization arises only when you are trying to localize something which is foreign. Why should there be anything foreign? There is no rocket science in the electric vehicles. Electric motor, which drives the electric vehicle, is age-old, decades old, the same electric motor. There is no technology change in that. The powertrain is the same. Only thing is that we do not manufacture battery cells. But friends, in the battery cell also we have around 80% of the inputs, the minerals available in this country. So I don't know what are the people waiting for, what the industry is waiting for to start manufacturing lithium oil cells in the country. We are trying to take it up, promote a few tens of gigawatt hour kind of factories by providing direct financial incentives to those investors who are going to set it up here. And what I mean by the direct financial incentive is that it's just that the quantum of the cell or the battery which is manufactured in terms of the kilowatt hour, and you get a straight incentive for that. So that is under the consideration, and the proposal is would be maybe coming out shortly. That is to have at least 50 gigawatt hour of the battery manufacturing facility in the country, which we need in the immediate future. The kind of changes which are going to take place in terms of the requirement of the batteries are to be fulfilled by the local manufacturing. So this is broadly as to what the government has been thinking, what the country has been moving forward. We have a very clear announcement of the fiscal incentives policies, as Vinny has also mentioned. The two-wheeler and three-wheeler is the largest manufactured automobiles in the country. About 80% of our vehicles manufactured are two-wheelers and three-wheelers, more than 80%. So they should be converted, and they are easily to be converted to the clean energy vehicles for the simple reason the battery requirement or the energy requirement for them are smaller. They do not require that kind of the infrastructure support which is needed for the bigger batteries. They are small batteries. They can be charged at home or at the shop or at the office by the 15 ampere simple chargers. So those are the low-hanging fruits, and we have gone straight away for that. If we put emphasis on our shared mobility, the public transport system, then certainly it will reduce the pressure on our stressed infrastructure, that is the roads, the congestion on the roads. So the government has very clearly come out with the policy of promoting clean energy public transport or clean energy buses. The Department of Heavy Industries has also come out with an expression of interest for providing charging stations we have received a whole lot of proposals from various government companies, PSUs, etc. Uh, I mean, there's a large number of participation. People have wanted about more than 2,000 charging stations in the country. So very shortly, about 1,000 stations would be approved with the government again subsidizing the equipment to the tune of 50 to 70%. So all this is happening in very quick decisions, and the steps have been taken by the government. And for the first time, we do realize, and the industry also does realize, that the government is moving faster than the industry. Now we look forward to the industry, look forward to the investments to come forward, take it up, and lead not only the country, but lead the world in the adoption of clean energy mobility.
Thank you, Mr. Srivastava, for giving us a perspective of the government policy as how the government is coming to the help, or if I may say, facilitating the adoption of electric mobility. And of course, we eagerly await the announcement of the battery policy. I will come back to you on some of the concerns that the industry has from the government, but I go to Mr. Sharma. Two-wheelers as such in our country has been an overwhelming success. In the two-wheeler space, we make more than 25 million conventional two-wheelers. We are the world's largest two-wheeler manufacturing nation in the world. And Hero MotoCorp, as you all know, is the world's largest two-wheeler manufacturer in terms of the units. How do you think we can replicate that success story? And if you would like to talk to us about what you have been doing in this space, and the infrastructure requirement in two-wheelers is not as challenging as it is for, say, the cars or for the commercial vehicle buses. So how do you see this panning out?
Thank you, Vinny. First of all, I'll tell you, like everybody knows, in India, the two-wheeler market is a very big market, as more than 20 million vehicles we have sold last year. But why not EV? That is a big question. It's not a question of product, it's a question of knowledge, awareness about the EV two-wheeler. And as you said, of course, it's very easy, as Mr. Srivastava said, ki just to transform EV two-wheeler is very easy rather than four-wheeler. So from government side, already government is doing lots of efforts from their side, but now it's a turn of an OEM and a people, like it's a society. Now we have to come forward and we have to work for it. How to transform this IC engine into EV? Because when we talk about EV, so the first challenge or the question comes in mind, infrastructure. People always talk about EV, they talk about the charging station. But I will say, at least it's a incomplete knowledge about electric vehicles. That's why people talk about it. Because of course it is required in four-wheeler. When we talk about two-wheeler, it is not required. It's not necessary. Yeah, like you can have the detachable lithium-ion battery, you can take out the battery, you can charge at your own convenience. Like for example, whenever we buy the mobile phone, we never thought of charging station. We always thought of, oh, can charge at our office, we can charge at our home, at our own convenience. Because when the customer buy the electric vehicles, some question comes in their mind, like what is the performance of the vehicle? Because when we talk about electric vehicles, people always think about it's a slow speed vehicle, it's a small toy, like that. That was the misconception in the mind of the consumer. That's why the people hesitate to buy the electric vehicles. But now the time has changed. Maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago, the situation was like this. But now the things have changed. Technology is changing every day. The best part of electric vehicle is whatever the innovation, whatever the things you want in electric vehicles, that can replicate very easily. That can be inbuilt in the electric vehicle better than IC engine. Same way in the electric vehicle, there was two myths for the consumer mind. One is the speed, second is the range anxiety. They always thought of it whenever if they come out of their home, whether they will come back or not. That was the thing. But if you see as a average range of a vehicle, two-wheeler running, it's not more than 60, 70 kilometers in a day. So if you think the same way the government has introduced a scheme called FAME to this year, it's not only the localization, they talk about localization, but they talk about the performance of the vehicles. They have divided this FAME into two areas. One is like the performance of vehicles, whether it's the speed, is the range, and the acceleration. The second thing is the localization. Why localization? Because government wants to promote the vehicles for the Indian consumer, for the Indian industry, so that the people can go for the concept of make in India. And the same time, the consumer have more confidence about the product who are make in India. So there is a reliability factor will comes in. So in the automobile segment, if you see, the most important parameter is three, that is QCD. One is the quality, cost, and the delivery, that is after sales service. If you give these three things in a good manner to the consumer, I think it's not a difficult task for any OEMs to convert the consumer from the IC engine to the petrol vehicles. Same way, I'll just share my example. When I started this company in 2015, we did the many market research. I went to a village where the people are using electric vehicles. The people are saying, sir, जब मैं गाड़ी चलाता हूँ तो साइकिल वाला मेरे से आगे निकल जाता है. So that was the thought process of the consumer. They always thought about the electric vehicles. But now the time has changed. If you talk about the speed, of course you'll get the good speed in the electric vehicles. You can get the good range. You can charge the scooters or the battery by take out the battery at anywhere at your own convenience. And the most important part is the running cost. Because at the end of the day, because India is a cost-sensitive market, people always thought of it, what is going to save if they use the electric vehicles. So if you compare the petrol vehicles and the electric vehicles, I think the cost of the electric vehicles is coming to be 20, 30 paisa per kilometer. By the same time, the cost of the scooter of the petrol vehicle is coming to be 170 to 180 rupees. So there is a huge difference in the running cost. But the major bottleneck is the awareness. The people should know the good product quality is available in the market. They can have that type of product who can match with the IC engine performance. Then it's very easy to convert these people. And whatever the challenges we are facing, maybe in future about the infrastructure as an ecosystem, whether it's a consumer, whether it's a supplier. But now in India, maybe you know better than me, now all the suppliers are changing their lines. Of course, they are doing for the IC engine, but now they are shifting to the electric vehicles also. As a Okinawa, we are the first company who got this FAME too. Because of the localization, we got the good support from the local supplier. They are making parts for us. As Mr. Srivastava has already said, it's not a rocket science. Technology is not so big. If you talk about the motor BLDC, we are using in our fans, ceiling fans. That is the same technology that is also called BLDC motor. So it's very easy. It's only a matter of your thought process, how we can do and how we have to do. Because somehow we have to start. Because government has already started from their side. So as a OEM, as a society, we have to move forward and we have to accept electric vehicles. It is not for it's a need on an hour. It is not for us, it's for our next generation also. Because if you see the condition of whether it's a pollution or other factors, I think we should adopt for this electric vehicles. And it's very easy to convert to 20 million or 25 million in the next 4 or 5 years, I think so.
I would wish you good luck. It's interesting that in the two-wheeler space, it is largely the new startups that have come, whether it is Ether, whether it is Ampere, whether it is you guys, or Hero Electric, which is not essentially a Hero Group company. And only recently we have Bajaj that has come in. Maybe there was some degree of a push or an encouragement from the Niti Aayog, and maybe TVS would do something in some time to come. This is a very interesting, if I may say, dynamics, and I think somewhere of what you said is that maybe the cost of the product upfront is seemingly high. It could be 20-30% more when it comes to an electric scooter compared to a comparable IC engine vehicle. But as you said, that total cost of ownership is probably much lower in the longer run. So we'll take it at that. And now we will hear a perspective on the four-wheeler pass car industry. And Mahindras and Tatas have been at the forefront, if I may say so, because they picked up the ESSL tender. Not sure which way to end, but the floor is yours, Aditya. You're an economist, so give us the underbelly.
Thanks, Vinny. I was just looking at the labels, and I'm glad we left distressed assets far aside. Definitely not something that we want to get around in the auto sector. But the labels actually give you a very good sense of how we want to lead to mobility. But just to take a step back, right? I mean, and I think we've talked EVs, we've talked IC engine, and we've jumped straight to saying EVs is equal to mobility. I think there is where a lot of the confusion lies. What do we understand as mobility is the first question. And I think Mr. Srivastav rightly pointed out the idea of moving people from point A to B and goods from point A to B. And once we figure out an efficient way of doing that, the choice of powertrain is then the next question that one needs to answer, whether it's going to be done on an IC engine, whether it's going to be done on an EV, how the costs work out, and so on and so forth. And there, you have different vehicle segments. There may be different use cases for two-wheeler deliveries now that are happening on Swiggy and Zomato. There is three-wheeler that is being done. IKEA is actually recently committed to doing within-city deliveries of their goods on electric three-wheelers. So there is definitely things picking up in that space. And I think Sir mentioned rightly about what are you solving for? So the motivation largely has been pollution, but driven by one metro city of Delhi. But there is a large part of India that lives outside of Delhi, and their pollution may probably not be the driving issue, right? It's how do I get from point A to point B? And there, I think the part that we forget is the commuter side of things. We forget how the commuter would like to move, what the commuter needs. It has to be reliable, it has to be comfortable. What is that value addition that we can give when it comes to new products and new technologies when we talk about EVs, right? And then of course, you've got disruptions that are happening. But a lot of the disruption today, is being talked about from a perspective of shared mobility. But then you have shared both in time and in space. So you have shared like your Ola share where multiple people are traveling together, you're sharing in space. You have shared in time. So Mahindra, for that matter, we've invested in Zoom Car. I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with it. It's a self-drive platform. It's something where, now they've evolved to basically allowing private customers to buy vehicles and put it on the platform. You can access it when you want, and the rest of the time the vehicle can actually be utilized commercially. So you're actually improving asset utilization. You're giving a different perspective, a way for people to kind of own a vehicle. And there we've actually seen now, they are one of the largest single fleet having electric vehicles. They have about 11, 12% now of their fleet, which is EVs, and largely driven by just this motivation, right? But the disruption is not limited to the way the passenger is commuting, right? It's on manufacturing. There is a huge amount of investment potential that we can see in manufacturing. We talked about cell manufacturing, but why only lithium? There are new battery chemistries that are being talked about on an everyday basis. We're talking about metal air batteries, we're talking about solid state batteries. People are working in India, outside India on a lot of these things. And there's definitely a lot of thinking that needs to be done in how we put the money there, where we put the money. And then, of course, another big part is the electronics, right? He hinted to EVs being largely dependent on electronics. But I think where the smart thing for us to do would be to actually look at synergies between sectors that are not necessarily automotive. For the large part, when it was IC engine, we always, there were things that were unique to us as an industry. When we moved to EVs, with the kind of components we required, there are components that are commonly used in sectors outside of automotive industry. Can we look at integrating that kind of demand and look at scaling manufacturing there? Probably that would help us bring prices down. And I think that's where we need to look at slightly the larger ecosystem. And then we talk about financing, right? But not just financing somebody to buy a vehicle, but we need patient capital. We need patient capital, and I think a bunch of you investors in the room, and I think that's where the big support would come. Patient capital is essentially necessary if you want to see industry being able to put its might behind new technology and R&D. And that's where I think even the investment sector can play a very key signaling role. If you are willing to give money to new technology, you can also play an important role in signaling. I mean, a lot of us say, oh, I don't want to finance it at 10%, but I would rather give 18% loan just because I think there's a risk to the technology. But if you've done your due diligence, and if everybody is talking about all of the fancy numbers and fantastic numbers that Vinny alluded to, then I don't see why there should be so much hesitation. So the investment sector can also play a very important role, and I think that's where it's not just the government or the OEMs who need to do their bit, and you can definitely do a lot more there. And for India in general, right, access to finance and technology has been a challenge. So that's where I think the ecosystem can kick in so importantly and play such a critical role, where if you give us patient capital, we can actually access newer technology and build that much more confidence and robustness into every product or service that we are able to provide. And then, of course, there are new opportunities for insurance. I'm just going through the labels that are here, but they pretty much add up to everything that we want to do in mobility. And there is now, I mean, nowadays you book a ticket on Make My Trip, it asks you if you want travel insurance. Tomorrow you book a ticket you book a ride on Ola or Uber or on Glide or whichever platform that we do, we can talk about mobility insurance. You don't even, why does only the vehicle have to be insured? You can insure people, right? I mean, you look at the Western world, they actually don't insure vehicles, they insure the driver. Why can't you insure the passenger? There are definitely new ways in which instruments can be created to look at that. Lastly, when I look at distressed assets, the only thing that comes to my mind is the problem that lies when it comes to charging infrastructure. We've been trying to do pilots in multiple cities, and our biggest problem is this. OEMs, IC engine, I never had to worry about, where will I get the petrol for it, diesel for it. For that matter, even with CNG, it's not as much as an issue. But with EVs, the one part that we're struggling with is the electricity sector. The electricity sector, especially distribution, is going through a really tumultuous time, and I don't think any of you need to be educated on that. But the problem that's happening there is that they're unwilling to give us the adequate kind of connections and ecosystem that we need to be able to put up large-scale charging infrastructure. For a simple slow-charging 30-kilowatt unit I want to put up just on the outskirts of Bombay, the distribution company wants the charging operator to invest in distribution capital. Now, that's not their job. So I think that's where, that's the new dimension that the EV ecosystem is definitely going to see, the new interaction with the electricity ecosystem. And I think there, the distressed assets definitely worries me to a large extent. I'll stop here, and then I'll,
Thank you. I think very, very valid points that you have. And between the two of our OEMs friend, I think some of the concerns that they have raised, of course, a lack of an adequate component manufacturing base for EV, supporting the EV manufacturing. I will say something on that. A very valid point on access to finance and access to technology. Mind you, the cost of capital in this country is one of the highest in the world. And of course, the challenge of the charging infrastructure, especially from a distribution, the electricity distribution network industry's point of view, because they don't see this as really their game in that sense. Coming from the component industry, there are a couple of things that one needs to understand that, and again, my friends from the vehicle industry who are in the IC industry can much appreciate that we are passing through a very, very tough phase, not from a sales perspective, but also from an emissions perspective. We are graduating from BS4 to BS6. It's a leap of faith. We have sort of leapfrogged BS5, getting into BS6. It's understood that the overall industry has invested something like US $10 billion, of which the component industry has invested about $4 odd billion. And then, of course, you need to be electric mobility ready. Considering the component industry is largely a small and medium enterprises industry, we do not have that deep pockets to do these kind of investments. It is not just the emission, the huge amount of safety norms that are kicking in. That also is a huge cost on the industry. It's all, the technology is not available. You have to import technology. But having said that, I'm very happy to mention here that there are at least 40 to 50 odd auto component manufacturers that are already some kind of a tie-up or some kind of a manufacturing that they're already doing for electric mobility. You guys do source some of it. And there are companies, especially in the space of what we call as power generation, which would include onboard chargers, battery pack, battery management system, some amount of traction motors, on interiors and HVACs, which include noise vibration harness, buzz, squeak, rattle, electric compressors. On the braking front, of course, on the electromechanical braking, aluminum disc braking, on the transmission front, and also on the wheels front, because the wheels are different from the conventional wheels. So there is some degree of movement in the component industry in there, but I think on the component industry, where one request of the government would be that there would be some fund made available to the industry for R&D, which is the automotive industry has been asking this for a very, very long time. If a fund could be made available, especially for smaller companies that could help them for R&D, for innovation, for technology acquisition, that could be, very helpful in the long run for the industry to stay on this path. Mr. Srivastav, would you like to talk something in terms of on the facilitation that the government would like to do in this space from a technology fund or something that you are thinking to?
I don't really know what you mean by facilitation. Can you elaborate a little bit?
What I really mean is that will the government, when you're doing this policy on battery manufacturing, is there some scope where you would allocate some amount
I mentioned it, the battery manufacturing, we intend to have the direct incentive in terms of the manufacturing. If you manufacture 1 kilowatt hour of the cell, battery cell in the country, you get amount X. Now that amount X is to be decided by the top leadership as to how much is going to be that amount X. But that is the line of thinking that we are having in the Niti Aayog, and we would like to have it like that, that for the first few gigawatt hour of the factory, the first few gigawatt hour of the cells manufactured in the country should be given, should be facilitated to provide the source of energy in the country. We have already said that you put 10 lakh two-wheelers on the roads in India within 3 years of time, you get so many thousands of crores as subsidy. You put 10 lakh three-wheelers on Indian roads, electric three-wheelers on Indian roads, you get so much 1,000 crores of the subsidy. You have 1,000 charging stations in the country, you get 1,000 crores of the subsidy. You have, you put 7,000 electric buses on Indian roads, you get 3,500 crores of subsidy. So these are all nothing but the facilitation. You buy an electric vehicle, you get a green number plate. You buy an electric car, you don't have to pay the road tax. You buy a three-wheeler electric carrier for auto for the commercial purpose, you don't have to pay the permit fee. What else?
Right. So clearly the government is facilitating that.
Vinny, so let me just flip this.
Yes.
Right. So I think while the government is doing its bit in terms of the signaling, just in terms of investment, right? About 5 gigawatt hours of battery investment capacity in India could anywhere be looking at an investment opportunity close to $500 to $600 billion, right? And that's the kind of numbers we're talking about.
Right.
So there's definitely an opportunity there, and that's where, if to the point that I was making earlier, right? That why are we looking at batteries only for automotive? The same batteries can be used for stationary storage applications. We have a huge amount of renewable power coming into this country. The only differences between power cells and energy cells, minute differences, can be worked out. But the assembly line, I mean, the manufacturing base is essentially the same. And I don't see why we cannot aggregate stationary storage demand. We've talked about peak balancing of power, et cetera, in the Power Ministry's vision. We're talking about automotive EV battery demand. If we aggregate that, I absolutely don't see why we cannot look at viability, commercial viable investment in cell manufacturing in this country.
Yeah, I mean,
Just to add to what is being said, we have a extremely optimistic target of having 176 gigawatt hour of the solar power generation to be done within next 12 months time, 12 to 18 months time. And the Prime Minister has spoken about it, and he spoke about a figure which is 450 gigawatt of the solar energy in his UN address about 3-4 months back when he was addressing the General Assembly. So look at it, and if you generate that much of the solar energy, where do you store it? You can't feed it directly to the grid. You have to have the storage. Now that storage is not that technologically that advanced as it is for the mobility. So the batteries, which the second use of the battery could be in the storage. There are other chemistries for the storage like iron nickel based chemistries, or even the aluminum aluminum water based technologies which are coming up. So whole lot of churning is taking place in terms of the energy and the battery scenario.
That's good to hear that. I mean, the figure that I had was globally the demand for power for the electric mobility by 2030 would be something like 1,740 gigawatts annually by 2030. So again, while it's reassuring to understand that the government of India is probably going to create something like 440 gigawatts of solar energy to meet. So Aditya, you are an energy expert, you know, and that's what you've been doing prior to being at Mahindra. So what's your take on a wells to wheel approach? 70% of the power in this country is thermal. And how does it pan out when we are looking at, bringing in electric mobility? How does it work out?
So I think you divide that into 2-3 parts, right? I mean, you are moving to more efficient IC engine vehicles on one side, which is being done with the BS6 and the new emission norms that we'll move to. But when you look at well-to-wheel for electric cars, right? One aspect is the manufacturing side. So we need a minimum scale of volumes to be manufactured to really, amortize the amount of energy consumption we do and get those kind of efficiencies. But let's assume that we were manufacturing, let's say, 100,000 electric cars a year, right? On a well-to-wheel perspective, definitely EVs make a lot of sense. And look at it this way, right? If you had so many IC engine cars on the road, that many tailpipe source emissions to manage, whereas if you have so many EVs on the road, tailpipe emission is essentially pretty much zero. The argument then is about coal power actually powering this, but then if we go by the targets that Sir just mentioned, or even if let's say it went the normal way, you are seeing an increase or an efficiency in the emission factor of the grid with time. And all you then have to do is really manage power generation. That's a much easier job to do, in my opinion, than managing every individual car. So imagine it's 25 million vehicles, tailpipes versus maybe say 500 power generators. There is a case to be made even there, and I'm saying this even in a scenario where we are talking even 15 to 20% EVs in the fleet. I'm not even talking about 100% EV scenario at all.
Maybe I'll take it on the face value and we'll have a side conversation. I've been asked to close the session. We're out of time, but maybe what panel discussion without asking a few questions from the floor. So maybe I'll take 2 odd questions from the floor So if you could, um, anybody who's interested in asking a question? So maybe, yeah, yes, please. Could you please introduce yourself as well so that we can put the question in perspective? And if you could indicate who do you wish to answer.
This is Sameer Kapadia here from Rockstart Capital. I have
Yes.
one question. I would like to understand what is the comparative position of India vis-a-vis in terms of government initiatives and in terms of the technology. Where do we stand versus the other countries?
Mr. Srivastava, would you like to take the first question and maybe?
The government initiatives have to be dynamic. And they should change with the change in the technology. They should change with the developments and the direction in which we should be wanting the industry to move forward. So it has to be like that. And most of the countries are doing it like this, and they have done it like this. I'll give you some examples. Most of the countries, those who are even quite forward in the adoption of electric vehicles, now withdrawing subsidy from the 2020 onwards, including China and the Scandinavian countries. Another example, China used to give subsidies when their cities decided to withdraw petrol, diesel, two-wheelers from the cities and introduce two-wheelers. In 2010, I'm talking about. To 2010, they used to subsidize the two-wheeler, EV electric two-wheelers, which was of the speed less than 25 kilometers, small batteries, but even they were the subsidized. Today, they are just not subsidizing those scooters. They are subsidizing the two-wheelers, which are having long range, more than 150 kilometers of the range, dense packaging or dense packing of the energy in the same weight of the battery, and likewise. So the government, as a think tank in Niti Aayog or as an individual also, I would say that the government policies, whether in terms of the financial incentives or even the duty structures, the taxation policies should be directed in such a way that we move forward along with our national objectives and the direction in which industry should be moving. Now your second part, you were talking about the technology. Now the technology, I have again repeating the same thing, except cell manufacturing, there is no rocket science in the technology, but we have a tendency of localization. We don't have the tendency of designing, manufacturing, and developing in the country. So friends, technology is concerned, but we should have the approach of not the localization, rather designing, developing, and manufacturing in the country.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
would you like to?
I'll speak to the
Industry
technology part of
comment,
that as an OEM, right? I mean, there's definitely no lack of competency when it comes to technology in India currently, when it comes to EVs, whether it's two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, whatever.
That's a sweet sugar to my eyes, my ears.
I think we've played a cat and mouse game and wait and watch game with some amount of regulatory uncertainty and everything, and a lot of those things have gotten ironed out with time. I think what I do hope to see going forward over the next 2-3 years is a more concerted effort into pouring in a lot more money behind R&D and behind the technology. So for that matter, as M&M, we've launched our own first in-house all end-to-end EV manufacturing facility just outside of Bangalore last November, which does pack manufacturing, powertrain manufacturing, all of that. So definitely that's a good start, and I think I wouldn't put technology risks up there, definitely not.
I would also like to put it somewhat differently. One, you also build competence, competitiveness over a period of time. We are just about started. The volumes are very, very small, When you get to a certain scale, things start falling in place, okay? And secondly, I think there's a huge startup ecosystem in this country. There are a whole lot of startups, including those in the battery space, including those in other products in the automotive space, and that is something very, very encouraging, so there's a lot of hope there. Yeah,
Got it. Thanks a lot.
yeah, thank you. Yes, please.
Anjan here from the Sustainers. We are a electric charging station in EPC. I have a question for Mr. Srivastav. I like the government initiative. We have been following, we have been reading a lot of policies being rolled out. What worries is that when we get into the execution phase where we are identifying a land and the ecosystem around it, the policies, the rollout or the mechanism around it is still not clear to us. So if you can elaborate on this a bit, please.
Come again, what is not clear to you?
The rolling out of the entire subsidy system for putting up a charging system.
No, it varies now. You need, for setting up a facility, even for any industry for that matter, it requires multiple sources for different kind of assistance. For land, you need something else. For the power, you need something else. Then for the raw material, you need something else, and the likewise. So if there are any issues with the rolling out, then it could be brought to the attention. But we have also worked with the state governments to have a very effective single window kind of implementation, particularly for the electric vehicles. Yesterday only I had a very long discussion with the Karnataka government officials. The entire Karnataka, or most of the departments were there, industries, principal secretary and likewise. So all this is happening in the country. The only issue is that there's the mindset which probably we have that there would be, but I mean, we are facing the situation. We are there with you. So I would tend to say that we are with all the stakeholders. And at the center stage of the entire thing is our passenger who has to travel from point A to B, or who has to move his goods from point A to B. So let's come forward. If there is anything, we are with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I've been once again reminded to close this session, and we are very fine on time. So I would like to thank my panelists for such a lovely and lively participation. And I request all the audience to keep watching this space. It's a very, very interesting space. And there's never a dull moment in the technology area. And I mean, we as an industry are there. There is ACMA, there is SIAM, and we'll always be there to answer any questions that you may have. So please be in touch with us, either directly or through Edelweiss or whatever. So thank you so much for having us, and have a great evening ahead. Thank you.